So Blizzard finally did it. They nerfed Wild Pawn Null in the way that we've been asking for months, and let's just jump into it. They nerfed Wild Pawn Null by saying it costs 1 less for each non-rogue class card added to your hand, which means the Maestra interaction is gone. You're no longer able to play Potion Belt on 2 and play Wild Pawn Null for free if you have Maestra. That is gone. You now need to rely on Reconnaissance, Tooth and Nefarian, Jackpot, and a couple of other cards in order to reduce the cost of this. And overall, I think that it should have gone back to a 5-mana 4/5, considering the nerf is this drastic. Because the only reason why they made it 3/5 was because in the past, you were able to reduce the cost of the card by so much that the extra stats would be too strong. But I think in today's meta, making this 5-mana 4/5 would have still would have been good. I think that the extra stat would have helped it out considering the nerf was as drastic as it was. Next we have Sinstone Graveyard going to a 1/1 Stealth Ghost to a 1/1 Ghost. Same stats. This is good because you're able to actually remove the minion. One of the big things I liked about Death Knight with the Blood Death Knight version was Asphyxiate kills the highest attack minion regardless of stealth or whatever. It just kills the highest attack minion. So I liked the matchup against a rogue because it was one of the only things you could reliably do to kill the minion before it did damage to you. Now, any class can do it, right? You have Siphon Soul in Warlock, you've got the Light It Burns in Priest, you've got Asphyxiate, but also Obliterate in Death Knight, as well as several other cards that can now deal with this 1/1 Ghost. I do think that getting rid of the stealth gets rid of the flavor a little bit, but I think making it just a big minion that you can theoretically now interact with is huge. Because the biggest thing I hated about it was I couldn't interact with it in any way. Like, at least if it was not stealth, but I didn't have the damage to kill it, at least I would have had the option to have tried to kill it as opposed to just guaranteed taking 9 damage. So I think this is a nerf that not only is good, but also feels way better to play against now. They basically killed the Demon Hunter quest by making it go from draw 4 cards this turn to draw 6 cards this turn in order to activate the first part of the quest. This is going to slow it down by probably 2 turns at least on average, which decreases the mana cheat by a ton. And that, along with the fact that Sinful Brand is going up by 1 mana from 1 to 2, huge nerf. Also, I called this one going up by 1 mana. And then I also, oh no, not Shock Spitter, going to 4 mana. Oh, that's a bit rough. Honestly, I understand why they did this. The speed of the card was still just too much, but like, I didn't want to see it nerfed by a mana. I thought that it would have been though. Because like, here's the thing. I wanted it to nerf the battle cry in some way. Make it a little bit harder to trigger. Maybe start it at 0 damage. So that way it would do a little bit less overall damage. Because nerfing it by a mana limits the damage potential of this card so drastically that it's barely even worth putting in a deck at this point. Like, I liked the idea of a weapon hunter. They hadn't really done something like that before. And I have always been a fan of Hunter. It's the first class I ever got Legend with back when I played on a budget. So it'll always have a special place in my heart. So I was excited to play a new form of Hunter, and I was sad that it was as strong as it was. But now it's just unplayable. Like, this is now a supporting card, maybe in Beast Hunter, as a way to get some direct damage. But that's about all that this card will do at this point. It's pretty bad now. Glacial Advance deals 4 damage, reduce the next spell by 2. To deal 4 damage, reduce the next spell by 1. This is what I said the nerf was going to be in my video. Nerfing the mana by 1 would be too harsh. Nerfing the damage by 1 would be too weak, like too weak of a nerf. Nerfing the mana cheat by 1 would have been just right. It just would have felt a little bit worse for people who like Frost Death Knight because they're not able to combo as hard. But overall, I think it was the best one, right in the middle, where it wasn't too strong, it wasn't too weak, it was just right. Next, we have Astalar, going from a 2-mana Mana Thirst 4 to Mana Thirst 5 to deal 2 damage. And then Astalar the Protector, Mana Thirst turn 8 to get 5 armor. And then Astalar the Flamebringer deals 14 total damage and 7 to start instead of 8 and 16. I actually like this a lot. I kind of like the fact that the Mana Thirst to activate the ability is the same mana cost as the next card. So my worry with this was the overall flavor of the card would be lost if they nerfed it in any way, because a 2-mana 2/2 with the Mana Thirst or whatever, and then a 5-mana 5/5, 8-mana 8/8. I was like, they can't nerf the stats, right? That would just make the flavor of the card significantly worse. But I think they actually saved it with the Mana Thirst 5, Mana Thirst 8, and then Mana Thirst 10 lowering the damage. Because I will say not doing 8 damage and doing 7 does feel a little bit weak to me. Not weak, but bad in terms of flavor, as I said. But The other two, I think, were salvaged pretty well, and this card did need to be nerfed. I mean, in its state of doing 16 damage, usually twice, sometimes even more if you were playing it in a Druid, lowering the damage by 2 to 4, whether or not you play like Bran or 2 copies of Eslar, does actually help quite a bit. And the lowered survivability of the other two means that you're going to be ever so slightly less consistent in getting to turn 10. So it's just a good set of nerfs through and through. Now we're going to go to the buffs. The Necromancer as well as the Bone Guard Commander are both getting buffed in the same way. The Risen Footmen are becoming 1/3s. I said that they were probably going to be buffed to I keep saying nerfed because we just went over nerfs. They're being buffed. I said they're going to go to 2/2s because the only way I could see these cards being buffed was if they buffed the corpses. But 1/3s increases their survivability, which is good in a Blood Death Knight, which means you're not going to die as fast. And then also good in Unholy, which means they're going to survive a little bit longer for you to potentially pump them up with various spells. Next, Unholy Frenzy, going from 3 mana to 2 mana. I called this one. I also don't think that it's actually going to be good at all. Here's the thing. It's a good card, but Unholy Death Knight has way more problems than just this card being 3 mana instead of 2. I already thought that it was a pretty good card because it generates corpses. It's good single target removal. They can reset the health of some of your low health minions right now. And the corpses are really good in a class that utilizes corpses to pump your minions. So I never really thought this card was the problem. Unholy Death Knight has way more problems. Same thing with Wither. I said it was going to get buffed by 1 mana, but it wouldn't matter, right? Because like the undead druid, it's just better to go aggro druid or ramp druid, especially if the meta slows down a little bit and you're able to now more reliably play ramp druid. Why would you play this? Like it just, again, there needed to be a little bit more of a pump to other things. Like just pumping 1 card, I don't think does it. I think if they pumped 1 or 2 cards, like yes, you pumped up the Necromancer, but Unholy Death Knight was so bad. You needed at least 3 or 4 buffs, maybe even 5 to make it viable. And then same thing with this. I think they needed like 1 or 2 pumps to Wither. Next, going to the Bone Caller, I said it was going to become a 2/6. It becomes a 2/5. But again, the idea was increase its survivability so it can survive aggro a little bit more. 2/6 probably would have been a bit too strong, to be fair. So 2/5 helps it out a decent amount. Same ability. Haunting Nightmare is exactly what I said was going to happen. It becomes a 4/3, and then it summons a 4/3, because in a Shadow Priest, you'd want to be a little bit more aggressive, and this is exactly the style of deck that this would go in. A more aggressive Shadow Priest, where you're playing cheap spells and summoning, and cheap minions, and you're able to summon this 4/3 relatively quickly. Next, High Cultist, going from a 5 mana to a 4 mana. I said that this card was going to either become a 5 mana 5/5 or a 4 mana 3/5. Glad to say I was right about that one. I think that this card might actually see a bit more play now because the extra mana, because you weren't playing it for the stats, you were playing it for its ability. So reducing the mana of this and making it a little bit easier to play could be a big deal. Even if you play this turn 3, it dies, and then you play the Cultist turn 4, or let's say you have like a 1 mana undead minion and this that both die, and you just play this for tempo on turn 4. It feels a lot better in my opinion now. Next we have Drakon Drather, garbage card still. It's unplayable. I said that this card needed to be buffed by at least 2, from 8 mana to 6 mana for it to even be remotely playable. Maybe I'm wrong, but I tried this deck and went 0 and 11 with 2 different Drathyr decks, so I don't think 1 mana saves this card at all. And then you have the Infantry Reanimator. It is also buffed by 1 mana. I think this is a little bit better of a card, and the Reborn could be quite good, especially with the Resurrect ability. But the simple fact is, it's the same thing as this. Buffing it by 1 mana isn't going to do enough. And then it's also the same thing as Unholy Death Knight. There's so many other problems with it that buffing these 2 cards in like a pretty minimal way isn't going to do anything. Next, we have the Vengeful Walloper. Goes from a 7 mana to a 6 mana. I said this in my video. I think this card could be a 0 mana charge 5/5, reduce the cost of other Outcast cards by 1 or something ridiculous, and Outcast Demon Hunter would still not be playable. It is awful. Again, I said I went 0 and 11 with this deck. At least I came close to winning a couple of times. I played Outcast Demon Hunter, went 0-6, was not even close to winning a single time. And with this being the only buff that Demon Hunter got to the Outcast deck, it is still not going to be playable whatsoever. Energy Shaper going from a 4-mana 3/5 to a 3-mana 3/4, exactly what I said. I like the ability. Getting the ability out a little bit faster is quite cool. Vast Wisdom going from a 3-mana to a 2-mana, exactly what I said again, because 3 mana to draw 2 actively thins out your deck with Arcane Intellect, and that's like, it's an old card, so they're going to keep that the way it is. But Fast Wisdom was just a little bit weaker than that, so they wanted to make it stronger because it was part of the new set. So I think that now, instead of being slightly weaker than Arcane Intellect, it's pretty significantly stronger, but having it be weaker than old Arcane Intellect did feel a little bit weird. Next, Time Warden is going from a 4-mana 3/5 to a 3-mana 3/4. Same style of buff as the Energy Shaper, and I think one other card is going to be buffed the same way. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this one. I like the buff, don't get me wrong, but I don't know how big of an effect that it'll actually have. Like, what 4-cost dragon are you going to play? A lot of dragons come out around turn 5s when they get strong, right? You got the 5-mana 4/6 that heals you. You got the one that summons 2/1 rush minions. I guess you could summon the Rush Dragon, the one that gains +1/+1 if you have a dragon in your hand. And maybe you run like Twilight Drake now to complement the Time Warden to come out turn 3. You play Twilight Drake turn 4. You have a big Divine Shield taunt minion. But I would have liked to have seen this go up like to a 4/5 for 4 mana because it just curves out better. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm happy with any buff to Paladin. I just don't know if this one is actually the direction they should have gone with it. Next, they have Asphodon. It goes to a 3/4 taunt. Oh my goodness, copy the last cut. Oh my goodness. I said that a cool thing for this card would be to add a copy of the spell to your hand and it costs 1, so you could play it however you wanted. That might have been a bit too strong, but making it a 3/4, so premium stats and taunt, which helps you against aggro and in the control warrior. Very, very happy with this. Also, it just looks like a taunt card, so very happy that it was given taunt. Next, they're going down to the Disruptive Spellbreaker, becomes a 4/6 for 5 mana. That's good. My thought was they're going to make it a 4-mana 4/5. And I was sitting here thinking there's no way, because being able to play that for on turn 4 is so hard to deal with and there's so much disruption. But making it a 5-mana 4/6 does increase its survivability a little bit, but it does not increase the speed, so it's not going to completely disrupt a ton of decks. It's still good. I think it's actually a very underrated card. Like in Control Warrior, I think I'm roughly 10-5 right now or something along those lines. Pretty good win rate is all I'm trying to say. And it's because Disruptive Spellbreaker is actually a lot better than people give credit for. If you make them discard their Colossal Horn, you get the one you get off of the Queen of Shara, that is such a huge swing. You get rid of a Shadow Step in Rogue, you get rid of one of the removal or one of the big cards in like a Naval Mine Warlock. Very, very good card, high potential. Next, Last Stand, 4-mana draw taunt minion, double its stats. New 1-mana draw taunt minion, Mana Thirst, double its stats. I actually like this change because 1-mana draw taunt minion, it gives you something to play turn 1 for Warrior, which if you're playing like a control taunt deck is something that you weren't really able to do. And at 4 mana, this card was god awful. It was unplayable. Now, even if you end up drawing it on like in the later stages of the game, let's say hypothetically, we'll say turn 10, right? You play this for 1, you still have 9 mana to play one of their big taunt minion that you drew off of it. This is just a significantly better card now. It's decent early game with some draw to help you get some survivability. Maybe curve into the Lava Gorger, right? For some control, you draw that, you play it turn 4, rather than having to play this turn 4 and then skip your turn essentially. So I really like this buff. Next, Nelly. Taunt, Death Rattle, add Nelly's Pirates to your hand. They cost 2 less. Pretty big buff. They used to cost 1 less, and before that, they used to cost just 1. At just 1, it was a bit too strong. They cost 1 less, it was useless. But now I think that costing 2 less will be a good balance. I still think it's going to be a little bit weak, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. Remora is going to a 5 attack. That's what I thought was going to happen. Interesting to see what people come up with for this card. I think that there could be a lot of cool decks people build with Remora, because the 1 extra damage, you might not sound like a lot, but in just 1 turn, this will probably attack 3 times. You play it, rush into a minion, it becomes a weapon, you hit with the weapon, it becomes a rush minion again, you rush in, and then it becomes a weapon again. So theoretically, this could be an increase of 4 damage just right off the bat, not including other buffs or things that you potentially do this card. So overall, those are all the buffs. I'm not going to go over the Battleground changes because I don't really play Battlegrounds. If you guys would like to see it, I'll leave a link to this down below so you guys can check out the standard and Battlegrounds nerfs and buffs. And yeah, I'm actually pretty excited about most of these. I think they nerfed a lot of the right cards in pretty good ways. I'm a little bit disappointed in Shock Spitter, but fair enough. They killed Quest Demon Hunter, but fair enough. I mean, it was broken. A lot of the buffs were pretty decent, but a lot of them seemed pretty useless, so I'm not exactly sure how good it's going to be, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe with all the other nerfs that came out, these decks like the Unholy Death Knight will all of a sudden become playable because it was a mix of things, right? Like the gap of power, now this one went up a little bit, this one went down a little bit, so now it's a lot closer than I'm actually thinking that it is. So overall, I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.